She was a living punishment, forever reminding the world that even beauty can be condemned when the gods choose to turn pain into legend. Before she was remembered as a monster, Medusa was already a shadow that made even the ruins seem to kneel. Her name moved across Greece like a warning, because no one looked at Medusa without imagining their own end, hardening into stone. But beneath the curse lay an older truth, buried among broken columns, sacred silence, and humiliated memory. Long before the serpents, Medusa was only a young priestess, serving the goddess with discipline and a radiance too striking to ignore. Inside Athena's temple, every gesture she made seemed to measure reverence, order, and a beauty that still did not know the weight it carried. Wherever she passed, eyes lingered longer than they should, and that was how admiration began to blur into unrest. Athena watched from above with the coldness of the gods, because even purity can look like a threat when it draws more attention than the altar. Medusa did not seek glory, but her presence was already stirring vanity, whispers, and rivalries growing far beyond the sacred. The more she tried to serve in silence, the more the temple seemed surrounded by desire, jealousy, and omens she could not control. That was when the sea began striking harder against the stones of the sanctuary, as if an ancient will were circling the temple from without and within. On that night, the sacred no longer felt protected, and even Athena's columns seemed too small before what was coming. Something broke into the silence of the temple, not like an ordinary man, but like a force too great to refuse without shaking everything around it. When the sacred order was broken, Medusa did not witness the beginning of a legend, but the exact moment her life was torn from its own axis. At dawn, Athena returned to the temple and found not only broken stone, but divine pride wounded inside her own house. Medusa fell to her knees expecting shelter, but before the gods, even innocence can seem too small to stop a sentence. The goddess's gaze brought no comfort, because there was no room left for mercy there, only for balance imposed by force. That was the moment Medusa's beauty ceased to be a gift, and was marked instead as living guilt before the wounded altar. The curse began without a scream, as if the temple itself had decided to harden everything that had once been light within her. Her hair twisted into new life born of punishment, and her eyes stopped pleading for rescue and learned instead how to wound. When she tried to rise, the first stone was born around her, and Medusa understood that she now carried a punishment that would crush all who came near. Not even the temple recognized her anymore, and every step she took seemed to turn the sacred into ruin and memory into threat. Driven out from the world of men, Medusa crossed dead lands until she found refuge where only fear still dared to remain. It was there that the world began calling her a monster, as if a new name could hide the origin of the wound. But the true horror was not Medusa's face, but the certainty that her curse still bore the shape of an injustice. And so Medusa remained alive, not as the end of a story, but as punishment breathing in the dark, waiting for a world that still did not know how to face her. In the first days of exile, Medusa learned that even silence could wound, when everything around her already treated her like a threat. Every step inside that refuge seemed to test a power too new, too cruel, and impossible to return to the gods. Then came the first men, not seeking truth, but the easy glory of hunting what they did not understand. They called it courage, but their faces already carried fear before they even crossed the stone entrance. When they saw Medusa for the first time, they did not see a victim of the curse, but a brutal mirror of their own excesses. The first man to advance hardened in that same instant, and the rest understood too late that death there could be born from a single glance. Those who managed to flee carried away more than panic. They carried a version of the story ready to condemn her all over again. From that day on, every statue before her refuge stood not as a trophy, but as a warning to the world. Even alone, Medusa no longer seemed lost because pain had begun to organize itself inside her as strength. She no longer expected forgiveness from the gods, and for that reason she began to build her own laws in the dark. Yet on the longest nights, the past returned whole, and the old temple still burned inside Medusa's memory. It was beneath that weight that she discovered something worse than loneliness. A part of her was still human, and it refused to die. But the world did not want to hear that truth, because simple monsters are always more comfortable than living injustices. The more her name grew in terror, the more adventurers appeared, trying to turn her fall into glory for themselves. They all arrived believing they were hunting a creature, but it was their own arrogance that entered the cave first. Medusa no longer trembled before them, because she had learned that living could also mean resisting without lowering her eyes. When more men turned to stone, the refuge ceased to be a hiding place and became a sacred border against the rest of the world. From above, Athena looked upon her again, not with compassion, but with the coldness of one watching her own sentence take root. The goddess could see her alive, strong and unbroken, but that did not erase the fact that injustice was still breathing in every serpent. That was when Medusa stopped seeing herself only as a victim, because even pain can change shape once it learns how to survive. She could not undo the curse, but she could decide that no one would ever step into her fate again without paying for it. And so the dark cave began to look less like a prison and more like a kingdom shaped by what the world had rejected. Men began to call her a living punishment, and without realizing it, they were closer to the truth than they had ever imagined. Because Medusa was no longer only the memory of a fall, but a presence that forced everyone to confront the cost of divine cruelty. And when night closed once more over her kingdom of stone, Medusa no longer seemed like a wounded legend, but like a force ready to be feared. With time, Medusa's name stopped traveling as rumor and began to weigh upon Greece like a truth no one wanted to face directly. Kings changed their roads, sailors avoided certain waters, and even the boldest began to treat her territory as a forbidden border. But where fear grows, so too is born the vanity of those who believe they were chosen to defeat it. They came better prepared, more cautious, and more convinced that the intelligence of men would be enough to tame a curse. Medusa sensed their approach before she even heard footsteps, because her kingdom already breathed in rhythm with every threat. This time she did not retreat into the shadows, because she no longer needed to hide from a world that had made her this way. When the invaders crossed the Great Hall, they found more than danger. They found a presence that seemed too ancient to be defeated. Mirrors and shields reflected her image in every direction, yet even so they could not give the men back control of the scene. All it took was one hesitation, one wrong angle, and one breath of panic for their order to begin breaking apart from within. Then the whole hall seemed to harden around them, and courage turned to stone before it could find a way out. When silence returned, Medusa was no longer surrounded by enemies, but by an unmoving court created by the arrogance of men. That night, even the sky seemed to watch her more closely, as if the gods themselves were finally seeing what their sentence had built. High above, Athena faced her once more, and between goddess and punished woman hung a silence too heavy to be forgotten. But not even before that divine gaze did Medusa bow, because she had survived too long to fit once again inside guilt. The storm turned over the ruins as if waiting for a new sentence, but from the heavens came no forgiveness, no ending, and no answer. When the sky finally withdrew, Medusa understood that she would remain alive not through mercy, but because her existence still served as a mirror to the world. From that moment on, her kingdom of stone ceased to be only a refuge and became the keeper of a kind of justice men never dared admit. Not everyone who heard her story felt only fear, because some began to see within the legend the outline of a wound too ancient to deny. Even far from there, Athena's ruined temple still lived in Medusa's memory as the place where her life had been broken and remade by force. Even so, the part of her that had been crushed did not disappear. It only hardened along with everything the world insisted on calling monstrous. In the quietest hours before dawn, the sea returned to strike the stones of her kingdom, as if reminding her that every curse is also born from a divine choice. That is why Medusa ceased to be merely a feared creature and began to exist as a living question about guilt, power, and cruelty. And the world kept calling that a monster, because admitting the truth would require looking directly into the face of its own injustice. But deep within her kingdom of stone, Medusa remained unbroken, as if not even the gods had managed to finish what they began. Because Medusa was not merely a monster, she was a living punishment, forever reminding the world that even beauty can be condemned when the gods choose to turn pain into legend.
If you love mythology, mystery, and epic storytelling, this channel was made for you. Subscribe now.